Good morning. You're tuning in to Voice of Reason Boston, and today we have our special guest, Greg Henning. He is the candidate running for Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. And if you didn't know, as I stated before, I used to be an advocate for the District Attorney's Office, and I left about 6 months ago, and I've personally seen Greg Henning in action as a prosecutor. But today we're going to learn more about him. He's not only a prosecutor, but he is also a mentor and a leader to his community. And we're gonna get to know Greg today, and Greg's gonna tell us everything about what he's doing and how he became interested in running for the District Attorney's Office. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me on the show. I appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. For our listeners and our viewers who are going to be tuning in on this segment, we wanted to know a little bit more about who Greg is,
Yep.
your background, your education, and where you were born and raised.
Yep. Well, I was born and raised in Boston. My parents decided to raise myself and my brother, who's actually here in the studio with me today.
Yes, he
On the
is.
campaign trail. They decided to raise us in the city, and I think it was an intentional choice by them because they wanted us to grow up in a place where we would get to experience the diversity of the city and
Right.
also have access to things like public transportation and the hospitals, schools in the city, and all of the opportunities like going to a Red Sox game, being able to walk around and learn public transportation in the city. So they raised us there. My brother is older than me by about 6.5 years. His name is Matt. My dad was a television reporter in the city of Boston. He used to work for many of the television channels that your listeners probably watched when they were looking at local television, Channel 2, 7, 5, 7, and 4. His name is John Henning. So for the last 20 years of his career, he was on Channel 4 as a political reporter and what they call senior correspondent. My mother was a homemaker. She raised me and my brother. And my dad worked up at the State House and also the television station because he covered politics in the city.
Right.
And so I grew up right in the heart of the city, right near the Charles MGHT station.
Okay.
And that's where I was raised for my entire life.
Wow, good. And what about your education? Where'd you go to school? And what made you want to learn to become like an attorney?
Well, for my education, I went to a school in Cambridge called BB&N. And that was a high school that I went to after my brother started going there as well. And then when I graduated from BB&N, I went to Harvard University for college.
Wow.
And I was at Harvard for 4 years. After graduating from Harvard, I went to law school at the University of Virginia School of Law. The short answer for why I went into law was my brother went into law ahead of me.
Oh.
He actually became a lawyer after graduating from Providence. He went to Boston College Law School.
Okay.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like a lot of people when they graduate from college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I spoke with him about some of his experiences. He worked at law firms, but also had a chance to work in the district attorney's office.
Oh.
And he worked for the sheriff's department. Both of us, I think, became focused on working in Boston because my dad and my mom had put so much into us about being committed and being responsive to your city, being able to give back to the people in the community that helped raise you. So when I was thinking about what to do, I knew law school was something I was considering, but I always had in the back of my mind that no matter where I went, I wanted to come back to Boston.
Boston is where it is. And where have you worked in the past before entering into the district attorney's office?
Well, way back in the day, my dad and my mom instilled in me and my brother a desire and a respect for working, even if you're somebody that is young. So my mom got me my first job at the local hardware store when I was 14 years old, unloading trucks up the street at Charles Street Supply.
Hard labor.
It was. I mean, for a 14-year-old, absolutely. Yeah. You had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Trucks would show up. You'd be unloading the trucks. I was a 14-year-old sitting in the local 7-Eleven with all the other truck drivers and the people unloading trucks drinking coffee as a 14-year-old, thinking, this is it. I'm a tough guy. I know how to do real labor. So I worked as a basically an inventory guy and a salesman at a hardware store as my very first job. And then over the course of the few years when I was in high school and going off to college, my dad said, try everything so that you can get an experience that will tell you what you like and what you don't like. I was a baseball coach for some summer camps. I taught English as a second language in the Bowdoin, Geneva neighborhood at a place called College Bound Dorchester. And I later reconnected with College Bound down the line. It actually is something I'm happy to talk about that helped influence my decisions.
Please do.
When I was first at College Bound Dorchester, I was teaching English as a second language as a young man. It was basically me and a couple of other part-time teachers that were training people who were interested in applying for their naturalization exam, to take the naturalization test and to become American citizens. I'd taken Spanish in high school and got really interested in speaking Spanish more fluently. And so I started teaching ESL classes and had a great time doing it, but also thought down the line I might want to become a teacher. So I did those classes, and then some of the other summer jobs, I worked at Rosev Dairy in Charlestown. I was unloading milk trucks. So I've had kind of a varied background.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
excellent. And okay, so now that you entered the district attorney's office, how long have you been working with them?
Well, when I started in the DA's office, I was an intern during the summer in law school. So for the listeners, when you're in law school, you stay for 3 years, but during those 2 summers that happen in the middle of law school, you pick a job that you think you want to do, and there's a potential that they'll hire you long term for the job. So my brother, who had gone through it ahead of me, said, take one job you think you're going to love and one job that pays really well, and then decide where you fall on that spectrum of how much you're going to need and how much you want to really love your job. The first summer job that I took was in the homicide unit of the district attorney's office in Suffolk County, and I became hooked on the work.
Yeah.
Every day when you get up, you're passionate about the work you're doing because, as you know from being a victim witness advocate, you're helping people that have dealt with traumatic things in their family.
Yeah.
Some of them are survivors of trauma or violence themselves. Some of them have lost a loved one. In the unit that I was working in, the homicide unit, you could see and feel the grief that families were dealing with when violence impacted their family. So I realized that that work had more impact on people and also gave me a greater sense of satisfaction than I ever got from any other job that paid really well. The second summer I worked at a law firm, and the law firm was in a building downtown. We were up on the 35th floor. The view was beautiful. It was catered lunches. The salary was amazing. I actually made more that one summer, the entire summer, 9 weeks, than I did in my first year salary as an assistant district attorney.
I believe you.
Yeah, because the pay is so low. And I came back and talked to my brother about it, and I said, I think the pay is better in the law firm, as everyone could see, but the work that I get to do in the DA's office is what gets me.
You're drawn to it.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everyone's overall happiness when they wake up in the morning that they have a sense of purpose for the day.
That's true.
And that they're motivated to do their best at whatever they're going to be choosing, whether it's being a teacher or a coach or working in a church or being an assistant district attorney. So when I left law school, I decided that I wanted to be an ADA, and after going down south for a year to work for a federal appeals court judge, I returned to the city and I began working as an ADA in 2006.
And you're still working. Well, you left the office to run, but you.
Yeah, the history in the office. When I started in 2006, I began working downtown in the Central Division, which is the courthouse they call the Edward Brook Courthouse, and I worked doing general prosecution. People who start there are called line ADAs because you're on the front lines of doing the work. And I remember that I worked there for about 11 or 12 months before I got promoted to run a unit called the Gun Prosecution Task Force. That was focused on gun violence and gun crimes throughout the city of Boston. And I had 4 other prosecutors that worked for me along with an administrative assistant. And I ran that unit for about 18 months, focusing on the prosecution of cases downtown that dealt with gun violence and people that were running around with illegal guns on the street, really things that impact the safety of the community. And then when I was doing that, a couple things happened in my life that really changed the trajectory and the course of my life, some of them in my personal life and some of them in the professional life, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Wow, that's excellent. What impact did these cases have in, like, how it impacted you as someone in the community? You were raised in the community.
Yes.
You know, so how did these cases impact you? And I know that you've been working there since 2006, and we know the pay is not great.
Right.
But there must be something in you that makes you want to stay and, like, forget about the pay, because, you know, living in Boston is expensive.
Yeah.
And just wanting to stay at the DA's office for that many amount of years.
Yep.
How did this impact you to be like, you know what, I need to do something. I need to make this different.
Yep. Well, when I first started, so that the listeners have an idea of just what we're talking about, I started with a salary of $37,500. And that starting salary now is about $46,000 if you're become a line assistant district attorney. That still makes every ADA that starts in our office the lowest paid assistant district attorneys in any major city in the country. because the salary structure in Boston is just so poor. And that's really a funding issue, a legislative issue
Right.
that we need to go back to the legislature and explain this is an important job. People care about this more than they ever have before. We need to pay assistant district attorneys a wage that works.
Not to cut you off,
No.
but let's, we have a lot of people saying, they would do this, they would do that.
Sure.
Is it, for the community to understand, is it something that people can just say that, oh, we can change the salary of the ADAs? Is it a long process, or is it something that you can do right away, or do you have discretion to do?
Great question. The budget of the district attorney's office, of every DA's office, is set by the state legislature. So this has to do with when you hear the governor signing a budget and the legislative leaders negotiating a budget. This has to do with lobbying them to try to get the salary structure. So this has to do with increasing the budget for the DA's office. People don't generally clamor to go change a DA's office budget because they don't feel every day how it impacts them. If you said, I have $1 to spend on a school or $1 to spend on a DA's office, I'm going to spend $1 on the school. That's traditionally been what people say. But the marginal benefit of that extra dollar, the impact you can have by putting that extra dollar toward a district attorney's office budget, can help dramatically change how the work we do impacts the community. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
One of the things that I really have focused on during the course of the campaign and people ask about is diversifying the office so that there's more people of color, both linguistically, culturally, and ethnically in the office, so that it represents the community that we're serving. But only 5% of graduates of law school every single year are African American.
Okay.
Less than 18% are people of color. If you take a graduate of a local law school, let's take BC for example, and that graduate comes out and is an African American woman who is applying to law firms and DA's offices, the most I can offer that young woman is $46,000 a year.
Wow.
The starting salary for the big firms that just start downtown is $190,000.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. That would show the reason why, that you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's the reason why it's so hard to recruit people, not only people from ethnic and linguistic backgrounds that are different, but also anybody who grows up in the city and says, I want to go do the type of work that impacts my community, goes off and does well.
Yeah.
And the best reward that I can give that person
It's 46,000. That hurts.
Right. It hurts. It discourages people from working at the office to start, because even if you started the salary at 50 or 55, you need to increase the overall budget to an extent where a person working for 5 years can make close to the type of increase in their wage that they would make working at a law firm. I'm not saying it has to be equal dollars,
Right.
but you should be able to get raises, you should be able to get bonuses, you should be able to have an increase in your salary that shows that you've devoted your work to doing this and that you want to get paid at least an appropriate wage. So, to circle back to the question that you'd asked before, there's important things that we can do to talk to the legislature and to get community support behind things like increasing a budget for a DA's office. Because if everyone agrees we want greater transparency, greater accountability, and greater diversity in the office, we need to be able to recruit people to actually make that happen.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I wanted to clarify that because I don't know how the budgeting works as far as paying people, but I know I've vouched, so many times about when I was an advocate, I had responsibilities.
The advocate starting salary now is about 35, 36.
Yes.
Okay. So imagine that.
Imagine.
And just to put it in perspective, when I started as an assistant district attorney in 2006, this would be now about 12 years ago, I had a starting class of 22 or 23 prosecutors with me. More than half of those prosecutors, myself included, worked a second job.
Yeah.
So we work a full-time job, 60 to 70 hours a week, because that's how much you're putting in the office, just like you do as a victim witness advocate. And then when you leave at night or on the weekends, you're going home to a second job. And this is after 4 years of college and 3 years of law school. And for VWAs, sometimes it's after college and a graduate degree.
Yes.
So it's really hard given
And
the
I was
salary
an
structure.
example of that,
Yeah.
because I had to get a second job just to maintain like my loans, my
Exactly.
bills, my mortgage.
But your earlier question about doing that type of work, in order to recruit people like that, you have to have people that are devoted to the community work.
Yeah.
So when I was a prosecutor running the gun prosecution task force, some things happened in my personal life. One of them was my parents got sick.
Yeah.
My mom had gotten cancer when I was very young, about 12 years old, and the cancer came back just after I started in the DA's office. So I moved back into the house and was taking care of my parents. And my mom ended up getting sick and passing away in 2008. which was around the time that I was right in the middle of running that unit. And then about 8 or 10 months after she passed, my father got sick with something called MDS, myelodysplastic syndrome, which is like leukemia. And he passed away in July of 2010.
Wow.
So pretty close together, I found myself, I was 30 years old, my parents were gone, and my brother was living in Winchester, north of the city. And I picked up and moved to Dorchester so that I could rebuild and start over in my life. Now that I knew, my brother was there and he was a great support system for me, but at the same time I was going to restart what I was doing in my life.
Exactly.
So I lived in and started building up a community in Dorchester. And the first time I walked around the neighborhood, I walked down Dorchester Avenue near my house to East Cottage and bumped into people out in front of a building that had College Bound written on it. And I remembered the name because 10 years earlier, I had volunteered at College Bound Dorchester teaching ESL, English as a Second Language, in Bowdoin, Geneva. This was a different building, but it was right down the street from my house. So I volunteered to start as a tutor and basketball coach for a program there for a traveling basketball team. And what happened was the first day I came to serve as the coach and the tutor for the program, I met everyone on the team, and the starting point guard was a young man that I had locked up and incarcerated. And that young man, his name was Jamel, he and I began to build a relationship where we could talk to each other about being on, in that time, opposite sides of his case. And I got to learn about the choices he made and the influences that had caused him to pick up a gun and end up having him be in South Bay House of Corrections. And there were many other people on the team that gave me similar stories and also exposed me to things that you wouldn't get exposed to if you're just working in the courtroom.
Right.
It has to do with stepping outside of it.
That's true.
One of the young men was a guy on the team who went to school in Codman Square, and his house burned down the end of the year that I was coaching there, the end of the first year that I was coaching there. His name was Sean. And I showed up at the place where the house burned down because he called me in the middle of the night. And his mom said, can you take him for a night? Can you have him stay at your house for a night? He was 15 at that time. He stayed for 6 months, and I ended up being kind of the parent of a teenager for 6 months while he stayed in the house and they rebuilt and figured out a way to get their house back up and running. So when I was dealing with a 15-year-old, I'm a single guy now with no experience raising children, all of a sudden I'm parenting a 15-year-old in the house, but I started thinking about what influences Sean was dealing with that Jamel, the young man that I had prosecuted and incarcerated, dealt with later on, a year or two later in his life. And I thought also about all the other people in the program, 14, 15, 16-year-old guys that I was coaching. And I decided I was going to change what I was doing. Instead of just being a prosecutor, I wanted to try education. So I quit my job and I became a teacher in a school in Hyde Park.
Wow. Wow. That's a good story. Because if you didn't come in today, I would have, even though we worked together in the office, we crossed paths, but I never had the opportunity to sit with you one-on-one. And I thank you for sharing that with us. And I can also be a testament to you mentoring, because I remember one day walking to court and then coming back, I saw you sitting down with two African-American young boys at the Irish pub. Sitting down eating. And I saw you, but I was a little bit confused. I wasn't sure why I was confused, but I can honestly say throughout my 4 years working at the district attorney's office, I've never seen anyone sit down and, have lunch or talk to anyone. And I know that's part of your mentorship now that I know that you're doing mentoring.
Yeah, the way that it started out was as a coach and a mentor in that team, a lot of the guys would end up calling and saying, I have a problem, can you help me? And the problems were little to start, because they would test you. One of them was, I need $5 in order to try to get home, and you start to feel out when they're taking advantage of you, but also helping them when I've seen their house, I've seen the clothes that they have on their back, I've talked with them and met their parents or the people that are taking care of them, or just the brother and sister at the house. And I've dealt with those experiences with the young men where you start to see the influences on their background and where they are in life. And then sometimes it was, I got arrested, I need help. And at that time I was still an assistant district attorney, so I could explain the process to them and also try to connect them with people who do defense work. Once I left the job as an ADA and became a teacher, people started just referring young men to me that had issues or needed help or needed mentoring and guidance. Some of them were people that I had prosecuted. Some of them were young men that were victims or witnesses in our office. There was a young man whose brother had been murdered. The case was being prosecuted by our office, and at that time the head of the Victim Witness Advocate Program, Kara Hayes, referred this young man to me to help him do college applications.
I love Kara.
Kara's a doll.
Yeah.
She is a doll. So I worked with this guy. His name was Nate, and when I quit and became a teacher, Nate and I stayed in touch. He ended up getting arrested. Shortly after that, he got transferred to Dedham House of Corrections, and I was teaching in Hyde Park. So once a week I would go over to Dedham and just visit him there to try to continue his positive trajectory so that when he got out he could do the college application, or at least build up a way to land on his feet. And I started expanding that so that I was visiting young men that I had prosecuted while I was teaching to try to make sure when they got out they had some sort of job training, a place to go, figure out housing, getting them a license, and then answering the questions that they had, their concerns, their anxiety about coming back out. When I was done teaching, I ended up coming back to the district attorney's office, and even though it was an untraditional thing, it was strange to have prosecutors working with people that they had prosecuted. I continued doing it, and I asked the office, I said, I want to still go and visit some of the people that have been referred to me that are in custody, but I want to do this work with some of the students that I've had in the past. And so the young men that you were talking about were two students that I had taught as 8th graders, and when I came back to the office, they stayed in touch with me, and I built up a continuing relationship with them so that those two guys, it was Charles and Manny, those two young men are like my kids now. I help with college tuition and helping them with jobs, their housing situation. They call me once a day for whatever issue it may be. And I feel like if I hadn't started at College Bound, just volunteering in a place up the street, no, I wouldn't have known, I wouldn't have had the experience, I wouldn't have the confidence to try to help people with things that are outside of the traditional role of prosecutors. But that untraditional process is how I've structured my career, particularly since 2009, 2010. And it's really the vision that I have for the work we can do in the district attorney's office.
And I know you can do it too, because when I was just, it stuck by me, and I've left, and I think I saw you like about a year ago doing that. And I never, I never wanted to go up to you and be like, what was that all about? Because I don't feel like it was inappropriate. So what if you're eating with two young people? But at the same time, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, what is he? You know what I mean? We're prosecuting. We're not, engaging with people as I think. And I think it's very important that, we can have more ADAs do that instead of, a lot of, I can say, this is just me, but some of the ADAs that I've interacted with in the past, some of them really don't have a connection with the community, and that's okay. It's not their fault. They're looking to learn as they're doing their job. But I think it's very important for people to know that, there are ADAs like you, or former ADA. You're no longer an ADA. You're running for the office. But it's important for people to know what you're all about, because I didn't know. I didn't know your story. I didn't know what you were doing out in the community. And whatever you were doing that day, it touched me, and it stayed with me till this day. And I think it's very important for people to know who you are about. You're not just here looking for a vote. You've been in the job for more than 12 years. You're engaging with your community. You're a mentor to so many other young people in the community. So I can vouch for you and say that, yes, you are what you say that you are, because I've seen you in action.
Thank you.
And I think it's very important for people who are listening in and tuning in to get to know you more. Go to your website, learn what you're doing, learn more about what you're doing, because there's a saying that says, what's that saying? You talk the way you walk. And
talk the talk and walk the walk.
Exactly. And I think that's what you're doing.
It is, and it's important for me that people understand it's not part of a campaign. And the difficult part of running for office when you're telling people about a backstory is everything gets colored by the idea that your motivation for doing anything in your life is to do this, to run for office. So people will look back and say he must have done that because he was going to run for office. I didn't have any desire, motivation, interest to run for office over the course of my career. It wasn't something I was thinking about.
I don't think so, because when we got the email, I just got another job. When we got an email, I was like, wow, I did not see this coming. I don't think anyone in the office knew it was coming.
I don't think anyone knew it was coming, and I don't think that anybody anticipated that a change would be happening in the office. But when you're doing the job for so long and you look at somebody running for office, whether it's a local politician or your boss, you see what you have to go through in order to run. Because now with social media, with fundraising, with the political calls that you have to make, it's a busy process, and it's not something where if you're very involved with putting together a murder case, for example, which was what I was working on just before I ended up taking the leave of absence, you're focused on witnesses and evidence, ballistics, and how to put a case together. Running for office is the furthest thing from your mind.
I'm not into politics. I just feel that, I have a calling to share the information that's out there, and politics can be very nasty. But I believe in giving everyone an opportunity and a chance.
Yeah.
And I believe that everyone has something to contribute, and we have a wonderful line of candidates that are running. But I actually saw you. I actually saw you in the office, and I saw you do your work, and I just gave you a personal testimony of how I saw you sitting with two young men, and how that touched me. And I'm like, wow, he's not only here to just to run.
No.
He's here because he's put in the work, and he's actually done something in his community that I saw.
Yeah, and the work that we're doing as candidates, it's important to tell people what we would be doing. So as I've spoken with people on the campaign trail, they've talked to me about the issues that are most important to them.
Right.
One of them is gun violence and shootings. So I've thought about the work that we do and my experiences. I've been doing prosecution for 10 plus years. I've done murder cases. When I took the leave of absence, I was the chief of the gang unit.
Yes.
My vision for the office is to address that issue that people have been talking about. And the number one thing I do is to start a unit called the Unsolved Shooting Team. That would be prosecutors, victim witness advocates, and then law enforcement people to cooperate that would focus resources on solving the shooting crisis that we have out in the city. And I'll give you an example. When the Boston Police Department tracks data, they announce statistics for shootings. And when I started as the chief of the gang unit in 2016, the total number of shootings that was reported was about 250. When I was looking at the data, it seemed that we were underreporting, not intentionally, meaning not trying to hide anything, but counting the concept of a shooting differently. So I started tracking myself and using data analysis to look at the number of firearm incidents, or discharge events is what I called them. So I started tracking in 2017, and it turned out that we had over 740 discharge events. And what I was counting was times when a person was hit by a bullet, that was the 250. But also every single time a gun was fired in the city, or in the particularly in Boston, where a bullet was discharged and a shell casing was left on the ground, or a parent had a bullet go through the wall of their house, or a person heard gunshots and saw somebody running from the scene. All of those incidents impact a neighborhood where the gunshot goes off.
Right.
There's actual statistical data that shows that standardized test scores for adolescents in a neighborhood where there's gun violence, even if a person doesn't get hit, those test scores go down in the weeks after a traumatic violent incident. So focusing resources on those shootings, over 700, we're not going to be able to solve every single one of them because sometimes there's no one around, there's no evidence, there's no video. But we found when we were analyzing the data that sometimes the shell casings, the ballistic matches for shootings, tied one gun to 2, 6, 8, 10 shootings.
Yeah, I believe it.
And that means a person goes and pulls the trigger on the street. They are not caught. They feel emboldened because they are not caught.
Right.
And it makes the next time that they pull out that gun more likely that somebody could get injured or killed. So a lot of the focus of the people who have been speaking to me, the public, when I meet voters, it's how do we stop people from getting killed and shot? Devoting resource towards this is an important step. And I have the experience, having done this for 10 years, supervised dozens of other assistant district attorneys in cases, and focused our energies on gun violence. I have the experience to be able to actually implement that and put it into practice, and I think that's what I want to make sure I convey to voters.
That's excellent. And let's talk about the LEAD program, LEED.
Yeah.
Tell us what the LEAD program is all about.
LEAD stands for, as you said, LEED, it's Law Enforcement Early Diversion. And the kind of genesis of the program is that there is a tremendous capacity in the DA's office and in the police departments that we work with, in community groups and in community partners, to work with youth in the community in a way that is not traditional. And by not traditional, I mean having them working with and interacting with prosecutors and police and court officials outside of the courtroom. Mentoring has been such a huge part of my life I have contributed to and work with YMCA, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Silver Linings Mentoring, lots of the different organizations that do that work. So what I was thinking is, there's so many prosecutors that I've worked with that want to do the type of work you and I are discussing.
Right.
And police do it as well. There's the Police Athletic League, there's the Cops for Kids with Cancer. If we can harness that capacity and that interest, we can start a mentoring program that's going to have a tremendous effect on the community in a couple of ways. One is, if you take preteen, young teenagers, particularly people in at-risk communities, or school officials can refer them to the program.
Oh, that's good.
We're going to be able to take young people that are potentially on the cusp of making a bad decision and put an adult in their life that they may not have, or an extra adult in their life that they can rely on as a resource. And that does a couple of things. One, mentoring and adults in their life has proven that it helps socialization, standardized test scores, and educational opportunities in general. But number two, there is a lack of trust between certain segments of the community and law enforcement, and that's our office included.
Yeah.
People say that they're not certain if we're doing the best we can for the community and that they don't fully trust that we're working on their behalf. If you can take a prosecutor out of the courtroom and have them working with a young person in the community to change that young person's mind, then he or she goes back to friends, colleagues, classmates, teachers, coaches,
It's
parents.
like a domino effect.
It's a ripple effect, exactly. That ripple effect can change people's perceptions of the work that we do, and that has a tremendous impact on everything from solving cases through having additional witness cooperation
Right.
to just simply the reliance on the community to make the phone call when there's something wrong, to show up as a witness if we need them, to be a juror and understand the process and feel that the system has the integrity that people expect. All of those things can be impacted by a program like LEAD.
Wow, that's excellent. And I think that would work. That would help the community to be more willing to, when something happens, they'll be able to come forward.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we have cases when you call witnesses to show up, they don't show up because they're in fear that something may happen to them. And I think that would be a good program to start with. It's not going to work over. It's not something that's going to happen, quickly. We'll see. But I think as time goes on, like we said, it's a ripple effect, domino effect. People will start talking to each other,
Yeah.
and then they'll be willing to want to work with the district attorney.
Right. There was a young man that my office and a colleague referred to me that was somebody that I mentored for about a year and a half. I'll leave his name out just because he is a survivor, or his family is relatives of a victim of murder. But his father was killed, and after his father was killed, some people in the office referred him to me, and I worked with him for about a year and a half between the time he was in 6th grade up through the end of 7th grade. And after about a year, some of his classmates realized who I was when I came to school to pick him up after school, and one of them said to him, you said he's a prosecutor, that means he's the feds. And the feds use this kind of a derogatory term. And this young man told his friend, and I was sitting there, I remember it very clearly. He said, he's not the feds, he's my friend. He's a good guy. And this is just as a 7th grader, so the concepts that we're talking about weren't quite as crystal clear, the lack of trust in the community. But he knew that his friend, by saying he's the feds, was saying, we can't trust this guy. And the young man that I was working with was saying, no, he's different than that. That type of experience can happen many, many more times than that. And it's a small step, but it also can have kind of a multiplied effect
Right.
by having other prosecutors, police, victim witness advocates, DYS workers doing that and still having that ripple effect.
Oh, wow. And also, I know that we have a lot of candidates that are running with a lot of different backgrounds, but what can you say about Greg Henning that is different from everyone else that is running?
What I can say is that this job requires somebody that can start on day one to understand that violence in the community and the drug crisis that we're facing in Massachusetts and the work of our office in solving crimes and preventing crimes, this job needs somebody who can step in on day one and do it. And I've been doing that in my career. In order to run an office like this, you need to know the stresses that victim witness advocates are under when they're working with victims of violence and family members of homicide. I've done homicide trials, I've done those investigations, I've worked with those families. If you're going to allocate resources to create something like an unsolved shooting team, you need to know how that works,
Right.
how an investigation works, and that's what I've been doing for 10 years of my career. There are no other candidates in the race that have that experience, that actually know the nuts and bolts of the work we do. There are candidates that are lawyers, all of them are attorneys, and there's people that have managed other organizations, but managing some other public agency does not mean that you can manage a district attorney's office that involves thousands of criminal investigations a year, 30,000 cases prosecuted a year, 270 employees whose job is to work on investigating and solving crimes and protecting the community. So I think experience is the first thing that changes or separates me from the other candidates, because I am by far the most experienced, qualified candidate for the role. But then the second thing is something you mentioned earlier in the show, which is giving people a second chance. The work that I've done as a coach and a mentor, as a teacher, but also as a prosecutor, is what makes me have that, or what gives me that same perspective that you do, that there are people in the community that do need a second chance, and that might be on their first offense to make sure that they don't have a criminal record. Because some of the young men that I work with, when they come out, the first thing that ever came up on their record was a marijuana conviction or something like that. And we need to make sure that we are effectively using the system to both persuade people to make good choices, hold people accountable, but also give people a second chance when they get out or when they are touching the system for the first time, so that it doesn't have a dramatic impact on their life that can never be reversed. And my combined experiences as teacher, mentor, coach, prosecutor, running the gang unit, I've done these types of cases where somebody might face incarceration, and I started it when I was running this unit. We would meet with the defendant and his attorney, not to talk about the case, but to talk about health care, their educational background, how many people were in their household, when did they start working, if ever, what type of influences did their parent figures or grandparents have on their life, so that you can structure a more appropriate outcome for that person, which might include giving them a chance to be on probation instead of being incarcerated, or have their case continued rather than having a conviction on their record. Knowing how to kind of, lack of a better term, holistically or more broadly understand people and cases, that's what I've been doing for my career. I don't need to learn that on the job, and I don't need to ask people how it works, because that's how I've been devoted myself in my career as a prosecutor and as a servant of public safety in Suffolk County.
And can you tell our listeners who are tuning in and our viewers, what's the next step for Greg? What is going on? Do you have any next coming events?
Sure.
And give everyone your website.
Yeah.
I want people to go and learn about what you're doing in the community, because it's very important, because September 4th is around the corner.
It is.
Next week is August, and we need young people to go and vote and to make a wise decision, to let them know that, this is what's happening in their community and they need to get involved.
Yep. The election is on September 4th, which is the primary for the Democratic side. There's 5 people running. I am one of those candidates, and I'm encouraging everybody to make sure that they go out and register to vote or vote. I think the young man that was here in the studio before, Edwin, he's outside in the hallway, but I'm going to call Edwin out. He needs to go register to vote. And if you're 18 years of age, you still have about 17 days to register, because the Supreme Judicial Court recently decided that 20 days before the election date is an appropriate cutoff. So 20 days before September 4th. Sorry
to cut you off. It's not funny, but the same way he's acting, I can imagine that there's so many other youth that are not even able to register to vote yet, and they're not doing anything about it. They hear the information, but they're not acting on the information.
Right.
And sometimes we can be our worst enemy.
Right.
We ask for things to change, and then when the change time comes, we don't do anything.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about registering to vote is that there's some difficult process. You can go online and get an application sent to you. It takes about, 2 minutes to fill out. And once you fill that out and you mail it in, you're registered, and you do it at your home address. The second thing is, for this particular election, there are, as you mentioned, Tamisha, 5 candidates. I would just ask listeners to go online and check out the website for the campaign. It's greghenning.com, and I'll just repeat it and spell it out, GregHenning. And to remind listeners, the campaign has got 39 days to go before the September primary. So go on greghenning.com, make sure you register to vote, and between now and September 4th, do your research, and hopefully I can convince voters to vote for me on September 4th for District Attorney in Suffolk County.
That's awesome. And also, I would like to thank my viewers and my listeners for tuning in to Voice of Reason Boston. This is a community radio show where we're educating the community as far as what things are going on and how to get involved. It's very important to get involved into your community. If you don't get involved, then you're part of the problem. So if you have any questions for me, definitely email me, voiceofreasonboston@gmail.com, or you can check me out on Facebook. And I would like to hear your concerns and your questions and what topics that you would like to talk about. Thank you.